Man of Tomorrow is here for another book review. This has been a great time being able to get these in as late. And we got another one that's in a similar vein to actually this book that I'm reviewing in this episode directly references the last book that I did during a book review, which was the last book I did was the Spaceships of Ezekiel by Joseph Blumrich of NASA. Now, this is also done by somebody who worked at NASA and helped out with the Apollo space program, etc. And, well, I mean, that's kind of fitting to talk about that here, considering that we are celebrating, the 50th anniversary or something like that of the Apollo moon landing. I think that's coming up, on the 20th of July, so just a couple days. So it's kind of fitting to discuss this. Anyway, so the book is Our Ancestors Came from Outer Space by Maurice Chatelain, and I don't know if I'm getting his last name exactly right, and I listened to it as an audiobook on Audible. It was also put out there by New Saucerian Press, who also put out the audiobook of the aforementioned Spaceships of Ezekiel. And I honestly, I think the narrator, I don't think there's a lot of words that he ended up getting pretty wrong. Like he didn't get a G in right. And so I don't know if he even had everything pronounced correctly, but I'm not going to knock any points for that in a book that otherwise, we'll talk about it. In fact, I'll tell you what, I'll read part of the back flap for this book from the print edition. This is one of those ones that I've had scanned over the years. But anyway, here we go. So our ancestors came from outer space. Did human civilization begin 65,000 years ago when extraterrestrial visitors landed on this planet? Is it possible that all mankind's knowledge did not evolve slowly but was bequeathed to us suddenly by such visitors? Maurice Chatelain has compiled an enormous amount of evidence indicating that this may be the case. A former NASA space expert, he argues the astronauts from another planet in another solar system did land on Earth where they mated with Neanderthal women, thus producing the Cro-Magnon people, much more highly developed, and taught them very advanced knowledge. These were our ancestors. Sounds fantastic. But Chatelain's theory has a sound scientific basis. Using computers... Now, for clarity, folks, this book's from 1978. So when you use the phrase, using computers, that used to impress the fuck out of people. You got to understand this, okay? I mean, this... I mean, now it's like, you mean he didn't use a computer to write it? Who the fuck doesn't use a computer, right? I mean, that's how you'd feel about it today. Granted, in 1978, when Maurice Chatelain, wrote this book, that probably impressed people, and that was something like, he knows how to use a computer. Woo! Now, I mean, for clarity, anyway, he goes on to talk about, he has carefully studied such mysteries as the Egyptian pyramids, Mayan calendar, and the Sumerian zodiac. And it goes on a little bit further, but you get the gist, okay? You get where he's really coming from and what he's going to be laying out. And for it being something, coming out of like 1978, of course, that's a couple of years or a few years after the Spaceships of Ezekiel would come out by Joseph Blumrich, and it'd be approximately 10 years around since Eric von Daniken's work, Chariots of the Gods, was released, and then also a good amount of years after the very impressive book. Of course, I think the Spaceships of Ezekiel was largely impressive, even though I think what was really impressive about it was, really everything outside of what Blumrich found out about this, supposed spaceship getting devised and described in the book of Ezekiel, particularly in the first chapter, but then also in later chapters in the book. Do listen to my book review for that if you want a little more background on what we might talk about here. But clearly, this is what would fall under, in modern colloquialism, would be described as an ancient alien book, okay, or what is known as the ancient astronaut theory, which got very much popularized, not that it didn't exist before, but was very much popularized by Eric von Daniken's work, Chariots of the Gods. Throughout this time, ever since that book came out, as well as Sitchin's 12th Planet, you'd have a good 20 years or so, going a little bit into the 80s, where these kinds of books were very, very popular. Very popular. And everybody was trying to really, I think, more or less cash in on what von Daniken put out there, though nobody probably, except for maybe Sitchin, no one hit the level of success that, in fact, I don't think Maurice Chatelain ever wrote another book, even though he puts a lot into this one. But I don't think anyone else ever really achieved similar success to what von Daniken did, with Chariots of the Gods. And, of course, he wrote, like, Twilight of the Gods. He's written a ton of books, and he's still publishing books to this day that either update on themes or cover different themes, but all, go around this ancient astronaut theory. So for Maurice Chatelain, to try and cash in on this, not a surprise. I mean, he had other books at the time like this, like Somebody Else is on the Moon, which came out in 1976. I might end up reviewing that. We'll see. Some of these other ones. I'm glad. Let me say this first off before I get into the book. I am glad that these books are getting put into audiobook, partly for the reason that, I mean, now with like Sitchin's work, he has a lot of pictorial, shall we say, evidence that you have to see in the pictures, that you have to see in picture. He has a lot of that, I mean, there are audiobooks done. Tantor, I think, actually did them of actually the entire Earth Chronicles series by Zacharias Sitchin. And those are still worthwhile to listen to in audiobook, but like Sitchin's work is so heavy on the evidence, especially on showing you the evidence, like, with pictures. It's tough to listen to in an audiobook, but some of these, like, quote unquote classics, no, they work fine as an audiobook because really either A, they are behind on some of their science, which ends up being true in parts of Our Ancestors Came from Outer Space. Not to say that Maurice Chatelain was an idiot. I think he's a very intelligent guy, and he did legitimately, work with NASA. I mean, that's not, and NASA, maybe culturally or sociologically, they might hire idiots, but as far as like people that know their stuff, well, they generally don't hire idiots when it comes to science. But again, I'm glad these are audiobooks, this one especially, because this one is really, there's not a whole lot new covered, but Maurice Chatelain rests heavily on something called the Nineveh Constant, which I will kind of explain what that is, but if it sounds like math, well, it is. And in large part, this book is a math book. Now, don't confuse it. The title kind of gives everything away, and it's a shocking one, I'm sure, especially even in 1978 still, the title of Our Ancestors Came from Outer Space. This is not to be confused with actually the book by, Ellis Silver? From 2015, or I think it was updated in 2015, but the book Humans Are Not From Earth. That is a book that I do want to cover at some point because it has some very interesting things to say, and don't assume you know what I think about it, because I am not going to say that I agree with it 100%, but there are some very interesting things within it. But it's not necessarily that premise, where the book, or the premise of Silver's book, Humans Are Not From Earth, is that literally we as a species came from another planet far away, or, well, wherever, and came to Earth, and we're not originally from Earth, and that's why we're not adapted to certain things. Like, say, we're not adapted to the 24-hour day. We're not adapted to our own sun. There's a bunch of things that he lays out in that. That's not the direction that Maurice Chatelain goes with Our Ancestors Came from Outer Space. But, just to differentiate on that. Now, one of the directions that Maurice Chatelain is coming from, and again, we will cover this book, and something that I want to give a little bit of credit to. Now, I had never, he talks about, and you kind of got a hint of it from the little intro that I gave you that's off the back flap of the hardcover. He is the one that raises the idea. Maurice Chatelain is the original, or maybe there was somebody else that brought it up, but he brings up what Nick Redfern brought up that I talked about in my review of Bloodline of the Gods, which that was, I don't know, I did that a few months ago anyway. But in fact, I got to get to Nick Redfern's new book, Cover-Ups and Secrets. It's like, as an audiobook, it's like 18 hours long. This is going to be an epic fucking read. And I hope it's better than Bloodlines of the Gods. But anyway, because my problem with, if you go back and listen to Bloodlines of the Gods, that book review, my problem with that was there were like the first 2 chapters and the last chapter of the book were absolutely fascinating. But the rest of it is just like trying to intersperse what I felt like were a lot of unrelated things. But Bloodlines of the Gods by Nick Redfern was the first thing that brought to life for me this concept that people that have a rhesus negative blood type, like O negative, B negative, etc., that they are some kind of like holdover, or they are maybe the descendants of extraterrestrials. Okay. Now, Maurice Chatelain brings that up in this book. He doesn't spend a whole lot of time on it. And overall in this book, let's cut to the chase on that. I just want to give him credit that actually he talked about that way before Nick Redfern did. And in fact, what I heard in this book was a lot of stuff that I've already heard, not just from watching Ancient Aliens, but from reading other books that fall under maybe that Ancient Alien, umbrella, okay, over the years. But I have to give Maurice Chatelain credit for his book came out way before any of these other books that I've read. And he was saying things way before any of these other guys. But again, I'd never, up until recently, I had never heard of the book, Our Ancestors Came from Outer Space. So I want to give him credit for being very much ahead of the curve and doing a little more research on the matter. It does appear that more modern Ancient Alien authors are definitely referencing and quoting Maurice Chatelain's work, even if they don't give him credit, at least not initially. But other like blogs and everything will point out that no, Maurice Chatelain said it first, and then you got Colin Wilson, some of these other asshats that are that are laying it out today, and just kind of regurgitating what Maurice Chatelain had said. But a lot of, I guess I'll just get right to it. I didn't really like this book. In fact, I found it downright boring. It is effectively, like I said earlier, it's a math book. A lot of Maurice Chatelain's evidence, I mean, he pulls from a lot of sources, like he gets into Atlantis, he gets into, Egyptian mythology and stuff, from Sumer and everything, and I imagine he's pulling some degree from Zecharia Sitchin on that. And I think there's some points where he's pointing at mysteries that even Eric von Daniken at the time would have been pointing out ahead of him. But he'll pull from all these different things, or, like the Tibetan kind of mythology that sounds a lot like Atlantis. He'll pull from all these, a lot of different sources. He'll get into the math around Stonehenge and all this other stuff. Things that, and the Mayan calendar, which was a very hot topic in the 1970s. Okay, was like, this idea of ending in 2012. He pulls from like the Rosicrucian calendar, which kind of resets every 108 years. I think the next reset is like in 2023 or something like that. But I mean, he pulls from a lot of different stuff. And it's things that if you've even like watched the show Ancient Aliens, a lot of it you've probably heard on there. Again, at the time in 78, it could have been particularly shocking. Some of the stuff that he brings up has been fairly well debunked. But his only real heavy evidence throughout the entire book is the math, is this math based around the Nineveh Constant, which I'll talk about. Okay, again, I'll get into that in a second. But the reason I didn't like this book and that I found it pretty boring was, and he even says at the end, he's like, if you're not like into math, I'm sorry. Like he apologizes at the end of the book. I just don't see, I can kind of explain the Nineveh Constant to you, which no one else really, I don't think it's like taken as well. Okay. For example, you have the megalithic yard, which was discovered by, was that Alexander Thom? Anyway, a very, very serious researcher in the early 20th century, and everybody laughed him away. And you can read the books of like Christopher Knight and Alan Butler, okay, which I think some of their work is actually really, really solid and interesting stuff. Other times they go way out of left field. But like they did Hiram Key Revisited, I think that's one of the best history books anybody can read. They really do. I mean, they stack the deck at times in that, but there's a lot of interesting independent research and unique research, or unique conclusions that I think they come to in that make it a worthwhile read. Their book Before the Pyramids was really solid as well. So was Civilization 1. All very interesting stuff. Yeah, so with that, they talk about, especially in Civilization 1, they talk about how, like, the megalithic yard, how it's here, it's unquestionable, but archaeologists in the early 20th century, they just could not accept this concept that, our ancestors, our ancient ancestors, had some kind of systematized, system of measurement, systematized system, some kind of, system of measurement that they just laughed it away. But then, Christopher Knight and Alan Butler, they go over it and, oh, no, this is, look at this. It's here, it's here, it's here. And that's legit. No one, nobody in the archaeological or even really the scientific community is jumping on and saying, oh, the megalithic yard is a thing. In fact, actually, Maurice Chatelain, to his credit, also mentions the megalithic yard. But I've never seen anybody run with it more than really Christopher Knight and Alan Butler, and their books are far more recent. They've only been coming out since the early aughts. Their probably most famous one is Who Built the Moon, which that goes way out there, but whatever. Okay. So anyway, now the megalithic yard, even though you kind of see it there, nobody takes it seriously. And there might be, again, it might just be a conspiracy of history as to why, that archaeologists just don't want to accept it. It doesn't fit their narrative. And that's a thing that absolutely happens. We've covered that many times. But the Nineveh Constant is similar to the megalithic yard, where I've never heard anybody take this seriously. Okay. This mathematical problem. Now, in the case of the megalithic yard, it's a great corollary here. In the case of the megalithic yard, Christopher Knight and Alan Butler use that as a basis for a lot of the points they have to make about how, how there was this ancient civilization, this advanced ancient civilization, and so on. And it was based, and this is the evidence that it was here. They have a lot more evidence than just the megalithic yard to make their point. And here's the problem, is that Maurice Chatelain, throughout this book, all he has is that he thinks, based upon the Nineveh Constant, he thinks that he has found a system of math that a bunch of different disparate cultures that shouldn't be talking to each other, shouldn't have a shared mathematical knowledge of any kind, that they all have the same system of math, and thus aliens. Okay, that's his shtick. All he has, though, is this math that he keeps applying to things that he doesn't really have a good reason, or in my opinion, a good enough reason in the first place to apply this math. Not only that, but, a system of math that all cultures share or whatever, an advanced system of math, that can be impressive if you actually do find that, say at Stonehenge or, whatever megalithic structure you want to point at. Okay, that's impressive. But also, I don't think that that's any kind of symbol of really an advanced culture. I don't think it's it's sure as fuck. It's a quantum leap of logic. It's not even logic at that point. To suddenly say, oh, there's this advanced math, thus aliens. And so for that to be his only evidence, I think the book comes off as very weak, very boring. It's not this Nineveh Constant's not really a smoking gun whatsoever. And again, it just reads off like he's saying, oh, it's well, I applied the Nineveh Constant here. We came up with this. I applied it here and it came up with this. And he basically says every time he puts this in, and anytime he puts the Nineveh Constant into a calendar, okay, it ends up correlating with these major events in history, be it ones that happened to the Earth itself physically or in human history or whatever, and he just keeps applying it. And I'm sorry, there's just, that's not enough. And I can't believe it's a fairly long book. I cannot believe that he got an entire book out of this. And he brings up other stuff where he's clearly quoting from other researchers, like Von Daniken, and Von Daniken is a researcher, like him or not, he is. And I don't, there's a lot of his work that I totally disagree with, and folks, to be very clear, if this is the first time you've ever listened to a special episode where I've talked about the ancient alien theory or ancient astronaut theory, I don't think aliens have ever been to Earth. So deal with that. Okay. I don't think there's ever been anything other than Homo sapiens that have, there's Neanderthals and all that, but you get my point. Hominids. Okay. And, just quick on that, that leads to another problem that I really have with this book, is that Chatelain kind of says that okay, and he gets into that, well, on Antarctica, and he brings up like the Piri map and other things. He's like, on Antarctica, there could have been a wildly advanced civilization that taught all of these other ancient civilizations that we know existed for a fact, that could have taught them their math system. Okay, and could have taught them about the stars and, the movement of things because they have advanced knowledge of planets, all of which, Sitchin talked about well before Maurice Chatelain did. He admits that, and he talks about Atlantis, and, says Atlantis he thinks was absolutely real, and that eventually we're going to find it, just like we found the city of Troy and so on. And, he's not losing me there. He's not losing me on the, because I also think that Atlantis was something, okay? But as far as what it was, that's a whole other ballgame. But so he kind of hints at that, there were advanced humans. In fact, there was a point I was going to get to that I've gotten completely lost on, or that I fast forwarded completely past, and I'll get to. Okay. Like he gets into that there probably were advanced human civilizations in the past, as in on the order of over, even like 20 or like 12,000, over 12,000 years ago. Okay. So he gets into that, but then for some reason he can't just stop there. He has to go further and say, but they probably learned it from aliens. And it's like, well, wait, why do you have to go all the way there? And this is what all these ancient alien guys do. And I think they fail every time when they do this. Even Joseph Blumrich, with really, in my opinion, a very good book, that being Spaceships of Ezekiel, which again, Maurice Chatelain mentions in this. I can't, and actually, I think the reason he quotes that and he doesn't quote 12th Planet or Chariots of the Gods or mention them is because Joseph Blumrich, Spaceships of Ezekiel, that was seen as a very serious engineering text, like that was very scientific. So it's a good one to appeal to because it's not, because it's Blumrich that wrote it. Again, one of the directors at NASA. It's got a lot more credibility going for it. So, if you didn't want to seem too crazy, which, your title being Our Ancestors Came from Outer Space, if that isn't crazy enough, but without seeming too crazy, you can reference that book back, right? But, Blumrich does the same thing where he goes, oh, it was probably aliens and all that. And it's like, guys, stop. Like, why do you have to go that far? And especially since Chatelain quotes so many other sources that basically point at that there was an advanced human civilization, maybe on Antarctica or whatever Atlantis was. Or, he brings up like the lost continent of Mu, which that's a whole other thing, MU. But regardless, like, why? Why go the crazy leap? Is it just going to sell more books? It's almost to the point, again, it annoys me. It's almost to the point of, if there were a real conspiracy, it's this idea that like all these writers, keep pointing at, or even like the show Ancient Aliens, they keep pointing. It's almost like COINTELPRO. It almost feels like COINTELPRO, where like, but it was aliens. But it was aliens. It's like they have to not even really mention, or they have to very quickly go beyond the idea that it could have just been very advanced humans with an advanced human civilization. It's almost like, really, there's a part of me that feels like they're just hiding this. I see no reason, especially with everything that even Maurice Chatelain brings up in Our Ancestors Came from Outer Space, why he has to go to outer space with it. Doesn't make any sense. In fact, even with the evidence that he presents about knowing about certain planets and all this, a civilization doesn't even have to be that fucking advanced. It could be, just has to have a pretty powerful telescope to discover half of what he's talking about. And the math problems, shit, I want to get into the Nineveh Constant, but again, I don't get it. I have no idea why. Why do they all run to it was extraterrestrials? Why do they run to the idea that it was aliens? So Chatelain's book, I think, fails on that account. And then also it fails on its evidence because, again, its evidence is all solely based around this concept of the Nineveh Constant. Now, the Nineveh Constant, okay, basically you had... there was an Assyrian library, okay, that had some odd 30,000 clay tablets, okay, with cuneiform, however you want to pronounce it. And one of these tablets has like these stupid huge numbers on it. Okay, now this is real, all right? I mean, at the very least, like, this tablet is a very real thing. But the number on it, there's a 15-digit number, which is, it's 195595520000000. So however many, so what is that, 195,955,200,000,000. That's the number, okay? That's the Nineveh Constant right there. And apparently, again, this, French communication scientist, okay, who ended up as an aeronautics engineer with NASA, that being Maurice Chatelain, he looks at these numbers and he finds out, this isn't so arbitrary. And he finds out that that number is actually 70 multiplied by 60 to the power of 7. And that, he starts applying that to megalithic sites. Again, for what reason? I don't know. Like, he doesn't really explain. He's like, I'm looking at these tablets and, wow, I saw this number and I just happened to do some crazy math on it, and it doesn't make any sense. But then he applies it to the Mayan calendar, and he applies it to this, and then he finds out that, there's these whole, equinoxes that do complete cycles for 26,000 years, divide that into the Nineveh Constant, and wow, look at all these things that happen on Earth every 26,000 years, blah, blah, blah. And it just goes on a train. It's a train wreck from there. But that's really all he's got. I mean, the other interesting stuff that he brings up, it's, the rest of it feels like a compilation. And this is similar to Bloodline of the Gods by Nick Redfern, where, okay, you got like 2 or 3 chapters that have some unique research, and they're kind of interesting, even though in Maurice Chatelain's case, I don't think so. But then the rest of it, all the middle stuff, is just this weird compilation or applying this number to something that, again, there's no reason whatsoever to do that for. I get it. I like that he's trying to say, well, there was once this one base civilization that everybody else kind of outcropped from. Okay, I'm on board with you there. You're not the only person to ever say that, but I'm on board with you there. And, he keeps going on. And then he does bring up, this is what I was going to get to earlier that I don't think I did. He does bring up, like in Bloodline of the Gods, the idea that, I did mention it, but that the Rhesus negative people are potentially aliens. And he gets into that. He even, actually, what he says first is far more interesting when you apply it. And I'm kind of shocked that Nick Redfern didn't go this distance. Okay. Or didn't go this direction, I should say, because Nick Redfern, boy, did he go the distance. Whew. But Chatelain's theory is that people with type O negative blood or any Rhesus negative blood are actually Atlanteans. They are descendants of Atlanteans. And that, like the Basque people, are descendants of Atlanteans. He doesn't bring up, he gets into the Phaistos disc, but he doesn't spend a whole lot of time talking about the Minoans, which I think, personally, in my own research, and I mean real research, okay? I'm not fucking around here. I think that the Minoans are a key to lost chapters of human history. I absolutely believe that. He doesn't spend enough time on it. But, maybe the Basque people, the Minoans, and so on, that they are like leftovers from, and of course it gets into Tibetan stuff too, but they are leftovers from, and I don't mean holdovers, I mean like leftovers. Well, I guess we could say holdovers too, but they are leftovers from Atlantean civilization, people from Atlantis. Okay, and that blood type is, and his claim is that, now, I mean, everybody knows that, royalty, monarchies and all this that are into like bloodlines, that they believe that they have to keep their royal blood pure. But his theory is that the reason they think they have to keep that blood pure is because they are descendants of Atlantis, and they really do have to keep like this Rhesus negative blood type, going. And so, but basically his argument is that, monarch or royalty today doesn't understand why they're doing that. They don't understand why they have to protect their royal blood. Like, they don't understand that it's type O negative or that it's this or that. And I think actually even Nick Redfern brings up about how much royalty is Rhesus negative or even type O negative specifically, which, again, Maurice Chatelain doesn't spend a ton of time on that, but he does bring it up. Nick Redfern is the one that spends way more time on that in Bloodline of the Gods, and he gets into that, like, O negative is even more special than the other Rhesus negative blood types, right? But with Chatelain and with this book, Our Ancestors Came from Outer Space, I mean, that's just one small part of what otherwise, I mean, that would raise my, that would totally pique my interest in that he didn't spend any time on. It's just a small part of a book that, again, is basically a math book, and a math book that doesn't really even need to exist and is questionable in its premises. Like, okay, great. He worked on the Apollo moon landings. Amazing. Wonderful. And I'm glad that at the very least he says, no, we absolutely did land on the moon and blah, blah, blah. Great. Okay. But so much of it, just taking this Nineveh Constant number and just applying it ever. I mean, this is one of those things, where people talk about this, that humans are really, or some anyway, are really great at pattern recognition, but then also they'll try and find patterns in just about everything that they're looking at. And this feels a lot like massaging things or seeing things that you want to see, or just coincidence. I mean, look, here's the reality with math. You play the numbers right and they're going to appear everywhere, right? I mean, so it's not evidence. And I kind of felt, other than it was interesting to hear someone else talking about the Rhesus negative blood types and some of his commentary on Atlantis, while, in Antarctica and all this, while that was kind of interesting, that's a very small part of the book. And once again, I'm left with like, what the fuck did I just read? I just wasted my time, and I mean, so I'm here to save it for you. Okay. Save you that time. I mean, you can read it, but I assure you, other than the couple things that I mentioned that he brings up that are somewhat interesting, he doesn't go anywhere else. And again, a math system, like all math is unified. The universe is math, so there's, to say that like somehow all of these different cultures having, basing stuff on, say, similar math or something like that, like I don't see that as any evidence at all. And you could say a measuring system is math, but then I find a measuring system, like the megalithic yard, to be something that suggests that there was a previously advanced civilization. I mean, that's different because that's something that's far more applied. And it's not just like this, and it's something that you can see that would get used, as to where the Nineveh Constant, you basically, and he brings this up a lot too, which I think is also discredits his work in a lot of ways. Okay. He brings up that he thinks there is some kind of occult force out there that has been guiding everything through the Nineveh Constant. And then he also says that he thinks that same force was guiding him to write this book. And you just lose me. You're trying to be like this hardcore scientist and mathematician and then an engineer, and you completely, and I'm not saying he's not a smart guy, he is, but you completely lost me on that. A megalithic yard is something that could be used, would be used. You can see the very practical application of it, as to where applying the Nineveh Constant to a bunch of stuff, there's like no real practicality there. It's all theory, and it's all like this idea that, everything's already set in stone, and the Nineveh Constant is like all this astronomy or astrological stuff that, and those are two different things, but one came out of the other. And all this astrological theory that these ancient cultures were putting out there, that it was, pointing at what's going to happen in the future and blah, blah, blah. Woo! I mean, it just goes so far with, again, very little evidence. So this is a book that I think is a complete pass. Again, a couple interesting things in it, but boy, did I there's a reason that I think this book has not continued to stay in print. I can think of some, like William Bramley's The Gods of Eden. That's probably never going to go out of print. Was it Comey's, was that Forbidden Archaeology? Probably not going to go out of print anytime soon. Because in a lot of these, or even Sitchin's work or Von Daniken's work, at least in those, and again, some of those guys, I don't know. But at least in that work, like there's some kind of evidence. There's something where you read it and you go, yeah, that's a great question. Or, yeah, what the fuck is that? You get none of that when you walk away from reading Maurice Chatelain's work. You just don't. And I'm not insulting the guy. I'm just saying that the book, I think there's a reason that it's not talked about. It's not quoted. I mean, it is kind of quoted in reference, just nobody mentions it, and they probably don't mention it modern ancient astronaut theorists don't mention it because they don't want you to go back and see that where they pulled that number from or where they pulled that idea from, that the book is, found very wanting. Like it's just, it's not a good book, and it's boring, and it's, there's nothing, and look, there's lots of technical manuals that are technically, no pun intended, boring, okay? That doesn't necessarily mean that a book is bad. But this is supposed to be something, you got a sensational title. This is supposed to be delivering, I would hope, on that title, and it comes up boring, and it does, on a very, what would seem to be an exciting title, even though right from the beginning I have a bias against it, because again, like I said, I don't think aliens have ever been to Earth, but yeah, it fails. It fails on many counts. It's interesting for a couple of things that it brings up, but otherwise, no good. So, 1978's Our Ancestors Came from Outer Space. In my opinion, skip this one. Unless you just you have a, you just have this deep passion for this ancient astronaut theory stuff. Unless you're just so into it and you just want to gobble up anything about it. Otherwise, skip this book. Don't touch it. It's outdated. And what's even in it isn't, the evidence isn't even compelling at all. And it's more a compilation of stuff that other authors have either A, already done the independent research on, B, have written much better. So stick with those, okay? Stick with the other books. And anyway, I have more of these kinds of books that I'm going to be reviewing in the very near future. I might actually get into Ellis Silver's book, and I'll probably get into Rodney Dale and George Sassoon's works here in the very near future. But again, pass this one by Chatelain. Just pass it. So that's it for this episode. Didn't have to be a long one because basically I'm telling you, don't fucking read the book. It's not worth the time. And if you want to even get into it might even be just a few paragraphs where he talks about the whole Rhesus negative stuff. Go read Bloodlines of the Gods if you want to get a little bit deeper in that. But even that, you've only got a couple chapters that are really worthwhile. So I guess you take the good with the bad. Anyway, that is it for this episode. I will see all of you on the other side.